Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to continue our reading of the chapter called Miami, Florida. And again, I will be modeling during reading strategies such as making personal connections. I'm going to start doing conflict because we did do that exercise and slideshow on conflict. And I do want to talk about that because there will be journal entries coming up about conflict. Visualizing, making mental pictures or a movie while you're reading, and asking questions while reading. So I want to go back. We are a couple pages into this chapter, and I want to start off with an actual thing question. A thing question is a factual question that can be answered by looking in the book. Usually there's only one answer to it, and the answers vary as far as if you are, more descriptive or it's more of a summary. So the first question that I have for us today is, why is this chapter called Miami, Florida? Now I can make a connection to Weeksboro, Maine, which was another chapter that we already read. And the answer to my question would be that Mrs. Zamora, who is Leah's mom, Leah was the 18-year-old whom Brent killed in her drinking and driving accident. She requested that Brent put up whirligigs to spread the joy that Leah brought to everyone. If you return to page 41, we can see the answer to this thin question. So it's the fourth paragraph down. I would say the chapter Miami, Florida is probably named by this city and state because Mrs. Zamora requested that Brent put whirligigs in the four corners of the United States to spread joy to people like Leah did whenever she came in contact. For example, Mrs. Zamora says to Brent during their mediation, quote, "This is my only request, that you make 4 whirligigs of a girl that looks like Leah. Put her name on them. Then set them up in Washington, California, Florida, and Maine, the corners of the United States. Let people all over the country receive joy from her even though she's gone." Unquote. So that's an example of how you can use the text to answer thin questions. So I'm going to start our reading on page 58 where we left off. We were right here, 4 years. And this was an interesting beginning to a chapter because we started out with the pronoun I. And I believe in our last reading, I asked who is the narrator of this story. It's not Brent because Brent was not a street sweeper and wasn't from Puerto Rico. So, for example, if you go back to page 55, I can say another thin question, which has an answer found in the text, is who being one of the sentence starters for a question or question starters. Who is the narrator of Miami, Florida? And right now we know that it is a street sweeper from Puerto Rico. He came here when he was 11. And I'm trying to think if we've seen his name. He lives in San Juan, from Puerto Rico. Okay, so we'll have to look. I don't believe that we have read his name yet, so we have to be on the lookout on that. We can describe who this person is by saying that he's from Puerto Rico. He lived in San Juan. He used to think of the street sweeper as being a monster and wonder what the people were thinking inside his head. And now that's where we are. 4 years I worked there. Then the restaurant closed. I got a job in a different restaurant. Many people spoke English there. I learned how to speak from them. Constancia was one of the waitresses, 18 years old, also from Puerto Rico. She was so beautiful that everyone gave her big tips. Some she would give to the dishwasher and busboys. She always gave more to me than to the others. We became engaged, then we got married. That was a very happy time. We lived with her mother. Constancia was not only beautiful, but very kind, very good. Every day I told myself that I was lucky. I went to class at night to learn English better, to get a better job. English is very strange. You chop a tree down, then you chop it up. Why loco? I filled out a form and got a job with the city fixing holes in the street. Much more money than from the restaurant. We had a party to celebrate. At the party, Constancia announced that she was pregnant. Her mother, my father, everyone was very happy for us. Down that street, to the right, at the red light, is the hospital where the baby was born. A very beautiful little girl. Everyone loved her very much. Constancia stopped work in the restaurant to stay home with the baby. She was a very good mother. When the baby was just 1 year old, it got a cold. This cold got worse. Then it went into the baby's lungs. It kept coughing and sweating, and then it died. After this, Constancia changed. She didn't go back to work in the restaurant. She missed the baby very much. Instead of hearing the baby's voice, she turned on the TV and let it talk all day long. When she watched, her eyes didn't move. Her face was like one of the statues in church. 1 year later, we had another baby, this time a boy. We named him Raul. This time, Constancia was different. Instead of laughing and smiling at the baby, she was worried all the time. She was afraid he would get sick like the first baby. I'm going to pause and make a personal connection for myself. Since you guys are only 13 and 14 years old, you probably haven't experienced having a baby yourself, and if you have, I don't want to know. Although many of you have younger brothers and sisters, so you may remember when they were born. And not every birth is easy or, perfectly healthy. So I can really make a personal connection to this because Amelia, you all know, was born with her and I in a very risky setting. But I can't possibly imagine how a woman feels when a baby passes away. So I also know that one of the reasons why we didn't have another baby is because I was super worried about Amelia being okay due to all the complications at birth. So I really can empathize with this character, Constancia. Raul learned how to crawl and started putting everything in his mouth. Every day, Constancia would mop the floor and vacuum the rug. She bought a special spray to kill germs. She sprayed it on his toys and the TV and the furniture. In summer, red dust falls on Miami. People say it's from the desert in Africa that the wind blows it across the ocean. So here is a extra credit question, which I'm hoping is not a thick question. I want somebody to really, truly find the answer for me. Is it true that red dust falls on Miami? And is it factual that the dust is from Africa and comes over by the ocean? So 100% extra credit for anybody who can find out that information for me. Constancia was afraid it would bring bad diseases. She went to a botanica and bought special candles and statues of saints and prayers to hang over Raul's crib. When Raul was 4, Constancia's grandmother and grandfather came from Puerto Rico to live in our house. All day the grandfather played dominoes in our kitchen with the man next door and argued about politics. He also liked to watch soccer on TV. His hearing was bad, so the TV had to be loud. The grandmother was always telling Constancia how to take care of Raul. Feed him more plantain like in Puerto Rico. French fries are very bad for the stomach. We taught Raul English, but the grandparents didn't like this. We talked to him in English. They talked to him in Spanish. Constancia's mother tried to keep everything peaceful. Impossible. It was like a war in our house. Now, I do want to refer back because it's something I underlined, at the beginning of the chapter on page 55, it said, peace is very hard thing to find. So here is our first connection with that sentence. Peace is very hard to find. So the narrator just said that although Constancia's mother tried to make things peaceful in the house, it was impossible. Some of you live with grandparents. Some of you have lived with, extended families. I'm sure that it is difficult when people have different expectations of what is the proper way to live and teach kids. One night on TV, I saw a picture of a bird flying over the ocean. The announcer said this bird lives almost all its life on the ocean. He said it was called a shearwater. I wished that I could be that bird. Live alone, far away from land. No other birds around. Very peaceful. I had a cousin in New Jersey. He moved in with us, 17 years old. Constancia's mother wanted him to leave. He was always playing rock and roll on the radio. He stayed out at night very late. I saved enough money for a car. The first time he drove it, he had an accident. Boy, this person cannot get a break. We had a big argument about it. Then I lost my job. All day I was home with Raul. I tried to play with him. Constancia wouldn't let him play in the street or even on the sidewalk. He couldn't ride in the car unless he wore a special charm around his neck. I looked for a job but couldn't find anything. Our money got very low. Constancia started bringing in money by taking care of babies for women who worked. First, it was 2 babies, then 3, then 5. There was always a baby crying, and the grandparents yelling, and the TV loud, and rock and roll loud, everybody arguing. One morning, very early before it was light, I got in the car and drove, not driving to look for a job, just driving. I got out of Miami, drove through the Everglades, very peaceful. I rolled down the windows. It felt great. I drove 2 hours across to the Gulf. I parked at a beach. I walked out, watched the waves. No one was there. A little breeze off the water. Very quiet, very nice. So here I would like you to pause and make a personal connection. Is there a place that you go to find peace? Maybe it's the beach, maybe it's your room, maybe it's above your garage, maybe it's in the basement, maybe it's under a tree in your backyard. After a while, I got hungry. I got back in the car and drove farther. I came to a town. I walked out on the pier. Nailed to the wall of a restaurant was a little marching band made of wood. An arrow under it pointed to the front door and said, "March on in." I went in and ate breakfast. Then I walked to the end of the pier. It was still early and cool. I saw people getting on a fishing boat. Then I remembered this shearwater bird. I've been thinking about it for months. They said you couldn't see it from land. You'd have to go on a boat. I asked the captain if he'd ever seen one. He said all the time. I told him I didn't want to fish. I only wanted to see a shearwater. He let me on for half the price. We left. Everyone else was busy getting their poles ready. Not me. I stood up at the front looking for the bird. The captain would stop to let people fish, then start up again. I looked back. I couldn't see land. That felt good. I felt like a shearwater. The sky was clear. The water was very calm. We went farther and farther. Then the captain called to me. He pointed. Following the boat was a flock of birds, diving into the water, fighting over fish, stealing fish from each other. Very noisy. He said those were shearwaters. I watched. I couldn't believe those were the birds I'd been dreaming of. They followed us a long way. I felt sad all the way back to land. Now, I do have a question for you, and it is a thick question, although it can be supported by evidence from the book. Why do you think the narrator of this chapter feels sad all the way back to land? What is causing him this sadness? I got off the boat and walked down the pier. I came to that wooden marching band. I stopped and looked. There was a trumpet, trombone, clarinet, and drum. Birds don't live alone, I told myself. They live in flocks, like people. People are always in a group, like that little wooden band. And whenever there's a group, there's fighting. If the people in a group get along, maybe they make good music instead of arguing, like Willie Colon's band. But usually not. That's how life is. I stared at that marching band, then I got in the car and drove home. That was last year. In summer, I got this job driving the street sweeper. 2 o'clock in the morning until 10. Very peaceful during the night. Then the sun comes up. The traffic starts. Everyone's in a hurry. Cars honk and go around me. All that will start in an hour. I'm ready for it. I always bring a tape player. I'll put on some music. Willie Colon's band. Now I do want to pause and reflect on a couple things. So finally, the narrator has found peace. He made a connection between his own personal life to the Shearwaters and as well to the marching band. I hope you could infer that the marching band is actually a whirligig. It's not very descriptive about all the parts moving, but that is the whirligig, and it really did have the narrator reflect. I also want to point out a detail about the setting. It says, I always bring a tape player. I'm not sure about you guys, but I haven't used tapes in years, and I had a massive collection. You used to be able to open the newspaper, and there was a buy one, get one free, or buy 10 and get 5 free, and my mom loved it because it sounded like such a bargain, and you would get all these cassettes. But I haven't used them in years and years. I'm sure most of you either use CDs or your iPad, iPods, whatever kind of music is streamed. So the fact that it's a tape player does say that it was probably, the setting of this is probably, I would say, about 20 years ago.